Hello, everyone. As Stephanie mentioned, my name's Dave Thompson. I identify as he, him, and I'm coming from our colonial capital on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. Now, for those of you who know me as the AGM stringent timekeeper, I apologize. In keeping with the NFU's love of data, today will be a treat with a number-laden presentation. We're going to have some fun here. If there's a single theme that can be drawn from the research that follows, it is that unlike so many other work environments, on small and mid-sized NFU-O farms, farm operators and agricultural employees work together. Farm operators and staff alike toil in the fields, barns, sheds, parlors, cold rooms, and packing areas. The project has heard that we work together, but also struggle together. Precarity and economic vulnerability may be felt differently, but it too is also shared. High input costs, low profit margins, and competition with corporate agribusinesses pinch farm operators. And seasonal and low-wage jobs undermine the value of farm workers. The need to elevate the essential nature of local food production and value all workers, NFU-O farm operators and their staff included, who put healthy food on our table, is an urgent issue of our time. So in March 2020, as the pandemic struck us all, the NFU-O embarked on a farm labor project. Most research on farm labor shortages have been tailored to large corporate agribusinesses, but we're doing things differently. Through consultation, research, surveys of farmers and their workers, and stakeholder engagement, this study focuses on the labor needs of and policy solutions for small and medium-sized sustainable farms. Now, over 600 farm operators and over 100 farm workers have participated in either the surveys, individual interviews, and/or workshops. This is really unprecedented. I don't think the NFU-O has ever had this kind of response rate for its surveys, so we're very thankful for all of your participation. Now, more than 50 Christian Farmers Federation of Ontario members also collaborated in this study, but I won't be including them in this presentation. Today, we're going to share some of the preliminary survey data. Now, we can't possibly cover all the information, so stay tuned for a comprehensive report to be published in June 2021. We've also been holding focus groups, locals across the province, and hope to offer more of these focus groups and provide short synopses of regionally specific data to NFU-O locals in the weeks ahead. We also hope in March to hold a focus group specifically for farm workers. Again, reach out if you'd like more information. Now, hopefully our 30 to 40-minute presentation today will illustrate the diversity of NFU-O farmers and farm workers that have participated in this study, indicate some of the problems and solutions as we move forward, and will generate valuable discussion on farm labor at today's convention. Now, feel free to posit comments and ask questions in the Zoom chat during the presentation, or you can save your questions for the discussion period. So to begin, 60% of survey respondents did not employ workers in 2020. Of these, 10% are looking to hire in the future, and 20% indicated that a lack of farm profitability is an impediment to doing so. Now, however, 4 out of 5 of these respondents indicated they are self-sufficient and have no need for workers. They told us that they rely on their own family labor to maintain their farm operations. A sizable minority also told us they are scaling back and approaching retirement. So in the interest of time, today we'll be focusing primarily on the almost 40% of NFU-O farms that do employ staff. Now, for starters, we must address that this study was undertaken during an unprecedented pandemic. For 56% of farm employers and 44% of farm workers, the pandemic had an effect on their labor needs or employment. But clearly, at a personal level, all were impacted by the pandemic. Here is some of what we heard. Many sounded alarm at the spread of the pandemic among migrant farm workers in southwestern Ontario and among temporary foreign workers at large abattoirs, and appreciated the NFU statement on the deaths of migrant workers and its support for status for all. Lots of farms suffered negative consequences from the pandemic. Even after the successful lobby to reopen farmers' market, many stayed away fearing declining sales. Those who had direct-to-restaurant sales were hit hard. Others downsized and shifted to crops that were less labor-intensive, especially those who formerly relied on temporary foreign workers that they had trouble bringing in, or international woofers. Others noted that COVID gave rise to hobby chicken artisans, which combined with abattoir labor shortages led to long wait times. Some even decided not to raise poultry this year. Others found adding extra essential health and safety protocols very labor intensive, and acquiring PPE was a challenge. On the flip side, the pandemic also created a boom. Online sales and CSA subscriptions spiked. Many hired more workers for general expansion, order packing, delivery, and logistics. These farmers and their staff reported working more than ever. Perhaps most importantly, respondents saw promise in the shift in consumer and eating habits during the pandemic, which created an unprecedented demand in local food. Here was an opportunity to challenge our long supply chains and win popular support for sustainable farm work as an essential service. The question many have asked is, when the pandemic lifts, how do we ensure that eaters don't return to major grocers and the demand for local food returns to pre-pandemic levels? Now, the next few slides offer some demographic insights into NFU-O farms. In this graph, we've broken down the total farm respondents and the total farm employer respondents by farm type. Keep in mind that many grow multiple crops and raise a variety of livestock. A few salient facts from this graph. While oilseed and grain farmers represented over a third of total respondents, they comprised only 15% of farmers who employ farm labor. Cattle ranchers also indicated a high degree of self-sufficiency, although they were the third most likely commodity group to employ workers. Vegetable and melon farmers account for over 50% of farm employers, but represented only a third of total respondents. Poultry and egg producers, greenhouse and floriculture growers, other crop farmers, and fruit and tree nut farmers were also more likely to be employers than other commodity growers. Of the 117 farm worker survey respondents, 80% were engaged in vegetable or melon farming. Moving forward, we'll really need to address the specific labor needs of growers by commodity type, especially small-scale vegetable growers and mixed farms. Okay, here we're breaking down farm operators and employers by age. Now, the Canadian Agricultural Human Resources Council has highlighted that over 57% of Ontario's agricultural workforce is over 45 years old. In many respects, our survey data confirms their findings. 55% of the 1,037 farm operators captured in the survey were 55 or over. But as the graph shows, isolating farm operators who employ workers is revealing. Although farm operators under 35 years old represented only 10% of total farm operators surveyed, they accounted for 17% of farmers who employ staff. In fact, a majority of farm employer respondents were under 55. So to sum up here, to grow labor capacity on sustainable farms really will require resources to support new, young, and middle-aged farmers. And thank you, of course, to Kate Garvey and her Youth Advisory Committee report yesterday for raising the profile of young farmers and young farmers within the NFU-O. In this chart, we're breaking employers and operators and workers by gender. And what we find here is that there's also more gender equity among farm employers than with farm operators as a whole. Of the 1,042 farm operators identified in the survey, 61% were male and 39% female or gender non-binary. Conversely, 46% of farm employers were female or gender non-binary, and only 54% identified as male. If our farm worker survey results are any indication, provided there are adequate supports, the gender gap is poised to narrow in the years ahead. Of the 116 farm worker respondents, 56% identified as female, 7% as gender non-binary, and 37% as male. Almost a complete flip of the gender demographics of the farm operators surveyed. So understanding the needs of female and gender non-binary farmers and workers should continue to be a real priority, as Aura de Groot indicated yesterday in her report from the Women's Advisory Committee. This slide is sharing some information about employment relationships. According to the Farm Operator Survey data, a total of 245 NFU-O farms employ a total of 1,020 workers, an average of 4 workers per farm. Farm employers spend an average of 26% of their operational costs on staffing. Now, 3/4 of these farms employed paid workers who account for almost 80% of the total workforce identified in this study. Our farm worker respondents align with this breakdown, with over 85% indicating they were paid workers. Internships continue to be an important resource and educational opportunity for aspiring farmers. However, as scholar and NFU-O associate member Charles Levko has noted, over the past few years, there has been a shift away from the use of unpaid internships on sustainable farms. While 25% of farm employers utilized unpaid interns volunteers, this employment group accounted for only 8% of the total workforce. And it should be noted and added here that this number also includes family volunteers and not unpaid interns in training. Now, again, according to the Canadian Agricultural Human Resource Council, in 2017, temporary foreign workers comprised 30% of Ontario's total agricultural workforce. Based on our survey, only 8% of NFU-O farm employers employed migrant workers, and they comprised only 9% of the workforce as a whole. And many NFU employers of migrant workers, like Jen Fenning at Fenning Farms, are outspoken on the inherently exploitative nature of foreign worker programs and are important allies and advocates for migrant worker rights. I want to thank again Ayla Fenton for highlighting yesterday the important work of the IPC, especially the Migrant Worker Subcommittee, which Fenning chairs, for raising awareness of progressive farmers' voices around migrant worker issues. Now, the idea of creating equity within sustainable agriculture was a recurring one in all of our conversations. As one farm worker put it, quote, "Farm work is the most fulfilling work I've ever done. I hope the way towards a livable farming future becomes more available for all types of people, particularly Black, Indigenous people of color, immigrants, and others who have even more barriers to accessing land, training, and farm jobs. Now, since the data indicates over 80% of employees on the surveyed farms are paid workers, we can further break them down by contract type and duration. It's no surprise that almost 3/4 of paid employment is seasonal. However, it is promising that almost half of paid employment is full-time, 32% seasonal, and 16% year-round. 83% of farm operator respondents confirmed they pay their workers more than the minimum wage. Now, the mean wage reported by paid employee respondents was $17.45. Now, in spite of the seasonal and part-time nature of most farm employees, their on-farm earnings account for an average of 79% of their annual income. Now, if we try to understand for the seasonal workers how they're stretching their budgets in the off-season, we can appreciate how hard it is for them to make an annual living. Here we see another graph that shows the top employer barriers to acquiring and retaining labor, alongside the top barriers identified by workers in pursuing multi-year farming careers. What I find interesting is that employers believed seasonality of labor to be the largest impediment to hiring workers, while less than 1/4 of farm workers saw seasonality to be an issue preventing their farm careers. Now, obviously, this is a perennial issue, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about this in the discussion. For employers, a lack of skills and experience amongst potential hires was the second largest barrier. For workers, financial issues, including low wages and compensation and limited opportunities and lack of land access, as we discussed yesterday, topped their list of barriers to a career in agriculture. Approximately 1/3 of farm employers acknowledged that low wages limited their ability to attract workers. Now, all of these barriers hold some serious consequences. More than 2/3 of farm employers experience labor shortages. 86%, almost all, have difficulty retaining workers for more than 1 year. And given the demand, only half of farm workers said they have problems finding work. However, many workers echoed that it is very hard to find permanent, full-time, good-paying agricultural jobs. Now, given this financial pinch on most farms and the difficulty in paying much more than the minimum wage, many shared that they offer a variety of benefits and best practices to attract and retain workers. For both farm employers and workers, matching farm values and a good management style topped the list of best practices. Employers took pride in offering a diversity of work experience. Farm workers stressed the value of reciprocal environment, team building events, and mentorship. Both emphasized educational opportunities, especially farm tours and access to recorded education webinars, like those offered this past year by Ignatius's New Farmer training program. Solidarity around food also topped the list. Meal sharing, free CSA memberships, and free food always sweetened and helped build friendships within the employee-employer relationships. On-farm housing was offered on over 1/4 of 187 farms. Just over half of farm workers who do not live on the farm would consider on-farm accommodations if they were available, and those who did generally appreciated having affordable on-farm housing. I'm sure on-farm housing will come up as an issue in our discussion. Only a handful of farms offered equipment sharing, land access, a supplementary health and dental plan, or profit sharing ownership stakes. But these are all benefits highly valued in discussions with farm workers. Although farm employer survey respondents follow the legal protocols of WSIB, etc., many shared that they lacked a variety of HR documentation. Only 5% of employers provided workers with a mental health policy, 11% with a sexual harassment policy, 19% with an employee orientation manual, and 27% with a health and safety policy. 60% said that given farm demands, they were unable to provide these documents. This said, everyone seemed to be very responsible in providing health and safety protocols and PPE during the time of COVID. Farm workers qualitatively expressed they are attracted to employers who make these kinds of resources available. Many farm employers suggested that it would be great if the NFU-O could develop and provide general HR supports, guidance, and training to support their labor management. They said, look, we're very skilled at being farmers. We know how to grow food, but management issues were things and skills that many were interested in learning more about. In the next 5 years, we wish to goals of farm employers in this study. They expressed a variety of future goals, many of them dependent upon their ability to maintain and or increase staffing. Not surprisingly, the desire to take more breaks and rest topped the list. But more than half also wish to make ecological and sustainability improvements, expand their operations, build new infrastructure, and hire new workers. And to avoid burnout, almost a third wish to hire experienced staff to help them take over some of the management responsibilities on their farm. Finally, less than 10% expressed interest in exploring seasonal agricultural worker program or other temporary foreign worker programs, and or wish to shift from interns to wage workers. Now, for the next couple of slides, I'm going to invite Jillian Murphy and Paige Postma, who have been making hundreds of calls to farm operators, and they are going to provide some details on the next two slides. Take it away, Jillian.
Okay, hi everyone. Can you hear me? Everything's good? Great. Okay, so 35% of farm workers report having had a hard time finding agricultural work, and a passion for working outdoors and feeding local communities and engaging in sustainable agriculture are the top reasons why farm worker respondents are actually attracted to farm work jobs. Over half, 57%, seek a lifelong career in farming, while another 29% are still considering it as a career path. And 46% would like to own their own farm, although many are interested in more cooperative farming models more than sole proprietorships. Probably due to this next point, the greatest impediments to their goals are affordable land and living wages. 54% want to be included under the Employment Standards Act so that they can enjoy the same benefits and protections as other workers. And over 32% believe farm workers should have the right to unionization and collective bargaining. And as a last point on this slide, farm workers, like farm operators, frequently stated that theirs is a labor of love, and they don't suffer any illusions that an agricultural career will definitely bring financial gain. As one farm worker put it, I do it because I love it, but the crappy wages for 7.5 months a year, then 55% EI for the remainder is crippling me financially. I try not to think too much about it or I get upset. Volunteers sometimes ask me if they should try farming, but generally I don't recommend it unless they have a very specific reasons or deep pockets. Paige is going to do the next one.
Hi, everybody. Okay, so yeah, I probably spoke with many of you over the phone calls. So I'm going to go over just this slide where farm workers acquire their skills. So the farm worker survey confirmed that many previous studies have suggested aspiring farmers learn their skills outside of higher education. And this kind of leads to all the other points surrounding this topic. Given the importance of on-farm training, urban gardening, various internship programs, the data suggests that there's a need to create policies and actions to support incubator training farms across the province. Connecting the NFU farms to urban gardens was also frequently highlighted as a way to foster more cultural diversity within the sustainable agricultural community. So kind of trying to break down that rural divide. A lot of first generation farmers aren't going to be in the rural communities. So that was a really important discussion. But going kind of back to the first point, policy and financial supports for farmers who take time to educate, often at the expense of farm profits, was echoed by many participants in the study. So in many other fields, people are paying for education and then going to work in that field, whereas in the agricultural community, a lot of farmers are paying to educate their staff. So that is like a big disconnect for employers and employees alike. That was discussed a lot throughout the phone calls. And I'll pass it back to Dave.
Thank you so much, Paige and Jillian. Okay, moving right along here. We're almost at discussion time. Bear with us. There's just a few more stats and details to present. Okay, so this slide here shows the top 6 proposed policies or actions to address the farm labor crisis on sustainable farms. Now, interestingly here, a higher percentage of farm workers than farm operators supported basic income, an important policy issue for the NFU. Expressed the need to engage more and more with farm workers on issues that matter most to the NFU and its membership. Now, both farm employers and workers were in alignment on the need for increasing awareness of the essential work of sustainable agriculturalists. As one farm worker respondent put it, "I love doing what I do, but the job will continually get harder unless the public learns more about agriculture. There are a lot of issues we need them on our side for, that is the public and eaters, because we don't have the time or resources to take it all on. At the end of the day, these issues affect everybody." Now, farm workers were slightly more likely than operators to see on-farm building codes changed so that they could live on-farm. There was a similar alignment on the need for wage and training subsidies. Lastly, almost 50% of farm employers wanted to see a student farm intern program. In conversation, many suggest that the effort involved in their own on-farm training takes its toll and detracts from overall farm profitability. They do it because they know the importance of mentoring and nurturing a new generation of farmers. Any help in providing education to their employees, like Ignatius's online new farmer training program, would be welcomed, is what we heard from many people in our discussion. Ultimately, what the National Farmers Union in Ontario and its members should strive for, suggested one farm operator respondent, is to provide a greater big picture analysis of the situation, leading to better solidarity between farmers and farm workers, leading to society valuing farm work more. Now, there's a lot to unpack, and I'm sure there's lots of complications to how to go about that, but I think it's a good way for us to think about how we need to work together to achieve our shared goals. Okay, so that really concludes the presentation side of this session. I wanted to mention that you're not too late. If you haven't filled out the surveys yet, we're going to keep them open for maybe a week after this AGM. So please do sign up. We might be in contact with some of you who completed the survey, but maybe skipped a few questions, just wanting to follow up. But we will do that on a case-by-case basis. And as I mentioned at the onset of the presentation, a full report on the farm labor project will be available in the spring of 2021. And I want to express my deep appreciations to the NFU-O board and staff who have been major supports on this project thus far, and especially to Jillian Murphy and Paige Postma for their assistance, and with hundreds of conversations with farmers. And to all of you who have already filled out the survey and corresponded with us, thank you. Certainly your input has made this project a success. Okay, so now we're in the discussion question period. I'm looking forward to hearing thoughts and comments and anything that can help strengthen this project as it wraps up in June.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. And just
I'm going to end my screen share now.
Okay, perfect. And we've got, looks like we've got about a half hour before lunch, so a little extra time for discussion if people are interested. We have asked people to try to keep their questions down to approximately a 30-second limit so that we can get as many questions in as possible. And we're hoping that the host can try to focus on a 2-minute response time so that we can get as many question points answered and all learn as much as possible. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. There we go. I see that Josh would like to pose a question. Go ahead, Josh.
Hi, thanks. The data that you got from the Christian farmers, would you say it's similar to the data that you got from us? I'm just curious, like, about, there's a lot more farmers in Ontario than just NFU members and farm workers, and so I'd be curious to know what the responses would be outside of the NFU-O.
Thanks, Josh. No, all of that will come in the final report. I just received their data, and so I'm trying to figure out and amalgamate it and see what differences we might find. And we did have a handful, maybe 20 respondents that were neither Christian farmers or the members of the NFU-O. It's hard to say. In discussion with the Christian farmers, it seemed like there was a lot of alignment, especially around things that I thought were important. There was a lot of stuff coming from the Christian farmers in support of migrant workers' rights, which I thought was very valuable. But it's really going to take us a little while longer to piece that together. And they also had a much smaller response rate, unfortunately. They had under 60 respondents. Still, it'll be valuable to compare and contrast.
Thank you. Were there any other questions? People liking to, oh, I see one just came through on the chat for Dave from Eric McVeigh. What was the most surprising thing you learned so far in this project?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, Eric, I think I come from a labor history background. And I think what surprised me most, I'm used to employers and employees being at odds with each other. It's generally an adversarial relationship. Now, I didn't include some important examples of grievances that some farm workers raised on their farms, which I will include in the report. But on the whole, there was a much greater sense of synergisticity between farm employers and farm workers. They seem to be aligned not just on sustainable farming values, but also on labor values. There seemed to be a widespread recognition by farm operators that that they wish to be offering more a financial remuneration for their workers. And there was also on the side of farm workers an understanding that this kind of farming has such low profit margins that it's hard to employ them at a rate that is in keeping with all of the effort and skills that they possess and commit to the farm.
Thank you.
Go
ahead.
I guess just to wrap up on that, Eric, I think the opportunities for farm workers and farm employers to develop concerted actions and fight for policy changes together is very different than you see in most other work environments.
Perfect. I see Hillary Moore has a question next.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Dave. And Paige, and I want to say Rebecca. I'm so sorry. It's not Rebecca though.
Jillian.
Anyway, sorry, Jillian. Yes, thank you for your work. So sort of midway through your report, Dave, you had a graph and about the expectations or what was offered in these jobs. And the farmer, the worker versus employer, and my impression was that some of the expectations on the worker end were, access to land was one you mentioned, sharing equipment, that sort of thing. And so that kind of, to me, muddies the water a little bit between being an employee and being someone who is looking for a more for a tenant, like a renting land position, wanting to have their own business. And so I'm wondering if you can just elaborate on that. Like, was there a contingent of farm workers that would maybe fit more under like wanting to start up a business and looking for that opportunity, or was it more complicated than that?
It's a great question, Hillary. Well, I think with the farm workers that responded to our survey, they were a different bunch than you would find if you were able to roll out and complete a survey of farm workers across Canada, right? I think in general, many farm workers, especially at non-NFU farms, it's just a job. But what we sensed from the data was that for the farm workers who responded to our survey, they really are in the majority interested in establishing their own farm operations at some point in the future, and they're developing the skills and training to do so. So in many respects, the work Eric's been doing on land access sort of neatly dovetails with some of this farm worker project. How do we move people along in their farm livelihoods from being farm workers to eventually owning their own farm, perhaps under a cooperative or shared models, and then themselves become employers. But I agree. In many respects, some of those issues raised, land access, are not necessarily things some farmers are capable of providing, but they were things that for the farm workers, they really would like to see access to moving forward, which is great that Eric and others have been working so much on the land access project. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yes, it does. I mean, it leads to more, or even just observations that, I just said in the chat, like that explains why it's hard to retain employees. I personally have experienced that. I'd love to have a multi-year arrangement with someone, but, I often feel as though it's a stepping stone and it can be difficult, it's hard for the morale. But so it does lead me to more questions and observations, but thanks for sharing that. That's great.
Thanks, Hillary.
Perfect. So I see Don has a question. Don, go ahead.
Thanks, Steph. Thanks, Dave, Paige, and Jillian for the presentation. Very nice, very thorough. When the pandemic was ramping up in March of this year, Agriculture, Agri-Food Canada had updates, weekly updates that I sat in on the TFW. And there was something of a bit of a hysteria there with workers there for a while. It was looking pretty grim. I know of one producer who was thinking of joining the NFU who hires labor. He told me he wound up destroying half of his cucumber crop because of no labor. And then there were other anecdotal stories about the number of producers who were not going to put in crops or going to cut their acreage back. Is there any idea of how much fruit vegetable production Ontario could have lost because of the pandemic, or potentially lost? I don't know, that probably is not part of your survey, but anecdotally, did you hear of anything? Because there were rumors of considerable acreage being lost because of the lack of laborers this past spring.
It's an important question, Don. I don't have a quantifiable answer for you, sadly. Anecdotally, we heard issues of cucumbers, asparagus, especially because of that time frame. There was a lot of asparagus that was left in the field this year, and that held true in conversations we had with OFA members as well. So yeah, it's I can't really quantify the amount lost, as I sort of mentioned too. Some farmers were able to think ahead. I talked to a number of farmers who were tobacco growers, including some of our members, that because they couldn't get in their temporary farm workers, they shifted to grain crops, and were able to do so in time so that they just didn't need the same labor demands as they would have previously. But many were not able to make those shifts in time.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Good, thanks.
Okay, so I see Diane Dowling is next.
Yeah, Dave, given the answers, the data you showed for support for basic income as a policy alternative, I wondered if you had any qualitative comments from the respondents, either the farm operators or the farm workers, on why they did or did not support basic income. It could help us in our advocacy for it to understand what people saw as positives and negatives.
Well, Diane, I'll pull that data for you and send it to you, because I think it would be useful for you as you move forward. My sense was there is somewhat of a split and divide amongst some of the NFU membership around finding ways to get the government to provide different types of social assistance, and others who have a little bit more of a libertarian ethos, let's say, and don't want to see the government intervening. So I think my sense is that in part, the lower number might be representative of some of the farmers who really don't want to see the government intervening. Now, that said, I also think that that question had a list of different policy measures that people would like to see enacted. And so basic income could have got lost in the shuffle there, or people might have selected certain things that they wanted to prioritize over others. So moving forward, it might be a good idea to actually put out a very short 1 or 2 question survey just on basic income to be able to assess the membership's opinions. Again, in our conversations, basic income came up regularly. So there's definitely strong support. I'm not suggesting that there isn't.
Okay, thanks.
Quick question from the chat. Ken asks if you have any sense of what the average number of farm workers per operation responded to the survey were.
Yeah, I mentioned that. So there was a little over 1,000 workers at 245 farms. So for NFU-O farms anyway, you're looking at an average of 4 workers. Now, I didn't further break that down yet, at least in this presentation, by full-time, part-time, seasonal, but I'll be able to do that in the final report. But that's generally the average. 4 workers per farm.
Perfect. And then next I see Arwa has a question.
Yeah, hi there, Dave. I'm just noticing that the majority of the farm jobs seem to be stepping stones to business ownership. So I'm wondering if you're seeing any movement from the government, either via policy or programs that will support farm employers for on-farm training.
So, okay, can I follow up? So to support farmers for on-farm training for business training or for skill set, agricultural skill set?
Sorry, it was the same thing that Hillary identified, that the turnover is so big on farms because often workers are coming in to get training. So I'm wondering if there's any support at all or anything coming down the pipeline that will support farmers to get compensated more or less for training people repeatedly year after year.
This is something that I think the NFU-O and NFU nationally perhaps needs to take up and push more strongly for. As far as I'm aware, there isn't a lot. I know that we've been in lots of conversations with Ignatius, for example, because their online new farmer training program, many NFU members and other farmers utilized some of their modules to help support some of their training demands and needs on their farms. And many farmers found that, and farm workers found that immensely helpful. But Ignatius's new farmer training program was a pilot program this year, and funding is up in the air. They're constantly looking at trying to acquire more and make sure that that the program can be stabilized moving forward. And that's just one thing. I mean, ultimately, you're right. Having some sort of basic subsidy for any farm that is an incubator farm or doing training as a large component of the work experience really need to be compensated if we want to ensure that we have farmers and farm workers for the future.
Thank you.
Yeah. I feel like I'm taking up a lot of space here too. I wonder if Jillian and Paige, Eric's question, can I ask that of you too? Because you had so many great calls with people. Eric's question was there anything that you've experienced in this study that surprised you?
Paige, do you want to?
Sorry to put you right on the spot.
I sort of echo what you said, Dave. I don't know if my microphone's working. You can shake your head if it's not. Okay. In how much when we broke down what people paid their employees, how farm operators were really trying to pay above minimum wage, at least for their workers. And a lot of times when that question came up, people were not necessarily offended, but like, no, I definitely pay them more than minimum wage. People were very quick to reassure me on the phone, a stranger, that they were taking good care of their employees. I think that was maybe the most surprising thing, is how above minimum wage people were paying their workers.
For me,
Thanks,
I don't know.
Jillian.
Yeah, thank you. For me, I don't know if it was surprising, but a lot of farms are trying to contemplate different ways that they can have an operation throughout the winter months as well, so that they can have like employee retention year round. So, you know, even some beekeepers were like, oh, we paint the boxes, we do like candle making, whatever they can do to kind of try and offer year-round employment like mushroom farmers thinking about starting up their own inoculation process in the winter so that they can offer year-round employment, because it's not only beneficial to the employee, but it allows them to kind of develop a rapport and, you know, keep building on the training that they've already invested into their employees. So that was a really cool discussion. And I think there's a lot of room to I mean, it's hard with a lot of operations, but, and then kind of tagged onto that, there was also a lot of discussion about, I think you mentioned it too, Dave, one time when we were talking, there used to be like some sort of dairy labor pool or something. So drawing, like sharing labor between farms was something that a lot of people talked about, because if you only need to bring in people for a certain task 3 weeks of the year, but then the other farm next door needs to use a worker for 3 weeks a year. I did speak to one farmer that was doing that. I'm not sure the legality of that, but they were sharing migrant workers and had arranged to deal with their neighbor. So yeah, those two things, like year-round employment and sharing labor with other farms, were two really cool things that I heard.
Thank you so much, Paige.
Perfect. Were there any other questions from the floor at all for our presenters, panelists? Oh, Diane has another question. Oh, and so does Michael. Shall we let Michael go first? I don't think he's had a question yet.
Sure. Take it away.
Dave, my question is to Dave. Down here, we're loaded with greenhouses in Essex County. They're probably the largest employer now in this area. The price of land is driven right through the roof, making it very hard for any young farmer. We can't compete with the benefits and the wages that they're offering, especially as the marijuana operations. I was wondering, had you had any worker responses from that?
A good question, Michael. The short answer is it was a challenge to think through how to best get farm worker respondents. So we did try to reach out through a couple of different networks to get employee respondents, because I would love to see workers at some of these big operations complete some of the steps, and then I'd love to see them actually connect with some of our young aspiring farmers and farm workers and build some solidarity between the farm workers on our small sustainable farms with some of these large agribusinesses. But we really weren't able to make those kinds of connections. It's hard, right? Because they're also not organized. They can't organize, right? The UFCW has tried to organize those workers off and on for years, but it's illegal to do so. Your other point, I think, is important about the competition. I know in Northern Ontario, we heard many farmers say, we can't possibly compete with mining wages. We would go bankrupt. We don't make that much an hour, not anywhere near that. So again, figuring out competition with other sectors, but also with agriculture as a whole is a thorny and difficult issue that we need to discuss and address. So thank you for raising it, Michael.
You're welcome.
Okay, so Diane, and then I think Katie, you might be our last question for this period. So go ahead, Diane.
Thanks. Dave or Paige or Jillian, in your conversations either with workers or operators, did you get a sense of the range of types of housing that was provided on farm or near farm, or what kind of housing workers were experiencing? Maybe not provided by their operator, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I can answer what I heard from people. I don't know if you have harder numbers on that, Dave, but yeah, a lot of people offered on-farm housing, but it varied greatly. There were some people trying to think of like innovative ways. I know we spoke to one farm that was doing like individual pod housing and then had like one main kitchen area that was shared. And I think Brenda was speaking about that yesterday in regards to zoning, is like what counts as a legal dwelling and what doesn't if you don't have a kitchen space. And going back to the price of land issue, I mean, we did talk a lot about that, and that was one of the questions in the survey. Does the cost of living in rural areas affect your ability to find people to work on your farm? So housing was a conversation, but it was pretty varied in terms of what was offered.
Great. Jillian, did you want to add anything to that?
No, just to say that the vast majority of people were looking to hire locally from their neighborhood so that they had to avoid this sort of issue of housing. And so I felt like a lot of the responses to the survey, and Dave probably has the numbers, was like, how did you advertise your job? And it was word of mouth. And so a lot of, when in the presentation, it says 34% of agricultural workers have a difficult time finding a job. I think that's part of that reason as well, is for people to avoid the housing issue, just hire people they know from the neighborhood, and it sort of creates a little bit of a cycle that way.
Thanks, Jillian. And I guess just to add to that, there's a lot of data on housing and distance, commuting distance that you take to and from the farm. And then a lot of qualitative responses were received as well. I know that maybe if it's possible for Ashley to share again that document that you sent around yesterday. I know there was a lot of frustration at municipal levels with zoning restrictions that denied the use of trailers or mini homes on properties, and people were finding different novel ways. I mean, if you were only employing 1 or 2 workers, it wasn't uncommon that they would be your bubble during COVID and you would live under the same roof with your farm operator. That seemed to be relatively common. But it really varied, and there were a number of farmers, farm workers, especially the younger ones, that were saying commuting an hour and a half each way, the gas costs alone kind of ate into a quarter or more of their daily farm income. And that's not sustainable, either environmentally or at a work level.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Katie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure, I guess this question is for any of our awesome presenters, but one issue that I encountered had to do last year with the timing of, we were funding our hiring through the Canada Summer Jobs Program, and the changes that rolled through that on a regular basis, and the delays in processing because of the pandemic meant that by the time we were hiring, a lot of folks already had summer employment, and we were, restricted in both the age range of who we could consider as well as geography, just because of, again, the timing. And so then, we hired someone, and then they found out afterwards that if they wanted to qualify for the student benefit, they could only work half of the time that we needed them for, but all our other applicants had moved on. So I had to be content with part-time employment, just to get anything done. And I'm wondering if anybody else had challenges like that. I mean, it was never-ending changes in paperwork and hassles.
Jillian and Paige can jump into, but I don't think I heard from anyone that thought that the Canada Summer Job Program was a good one. There are so many problems with it, and some of the things you pointed out are really important. I didn't break down our farm worker respondents by age, but many people who are entering farm work are doing it after an academic sort of business experience and then they decide, no, I want to actually be out and work on the land, they're not going to qualify for Canada's summer jobs. So, you know, there's a whole pool of potential workers out there that don't qualify for these subsidies that many of you need in order to make ends meet on your farm. The timing of it is screwed up, as you pointed out. There are multiple issues with it. Aside from the fact that filling out the forms themselves can be unduly complicated. So I think moving forward, we really need to look at whether we need to, you know, try to revamp the program altogether, or push policy-wise for there to be a separate subsidy stream for agricultural work. Because again, students, you got this block of time that doesn't actually follow the seasonal agricultural, you know, setup anyway. So you're going to lose those people right when you need them most during harvest season. It doesn't seem like it's sustainable at all.